Hi, I'm Britton LaRue, and this is Moon to Moon. Moon to Moon is a space to consider, celebrate, and share the ways we come home to ourselves, anchor through change, and uncover our power. 1 month, one phase, one loving step at a time. Dear Moon to Moon, it's Britton. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. And welcome if it's your first visit here. We have completed now with this episode my series Unshaming the Houses for Moon to Moon that I began in Leo season with Jeff Hinshaw of Cosmic Cousins helping me to unshame the first house. We had Sabrina Monarch for the second house. We had Suprasensory Shahir for the third house. Rebecca Paget for the fourth house. Jonathan Coe for the fifth house. Aaron Kelly for the sixth. Colin Bedell of Queer Cosmos for the seventh. Mariolo Rosario for the 8th, Heidi Rose Robbins for the 9th, Diana Rose Harper for the 10th, Kelsey Todorici for the 11th, and now here for the 12th house episode, the house of my Sun, the house of my Mercury, the house of my Venus. I bring you astrologer Danny Larkin, who I've come to know in 2024, one of my gifts of 2024. I'll introduce Danny in a minute, and you do get to hear us talk about how we know each other in the conversation, so I'll be brief. But I was working with Danny as a client, and Danny was in the contract as in his capacity as the astrologer, supporting me in new ways of connecting with my own chart. There's never an end, in my opinion, to connecting with your chart. We can always only see our charts partially, and our relationship to our charts is as animated as any other relationship we would have in our lives. So it's always changing, and it's always a treat to feel the pull, to feel a call, a quiver towards working with another human being to support me and understanding my chart and its many invitations, paradoxes, and complexities. So I was working with Danny, and we were doing multiple readings, and I had just decided to create a series for Moon to Moon called Unshaming the Houses, and invited Danny to pick whatever house he wanted. And immediately, Danny's like, I'm taking the 12th. Like, all right then. Well, we're not talking for months, so I'll let you know when it's time to schedule. And his was it turned out the last to record as well. So some of these are recorded out of order just for a variety of reasons. But the finale felt like a finale because it was the last. So really proud of this conversation. It went in directions like I could not have anticipated. This is part of the genius of it being Danny. Many things were said about the 12th house that are not things that I have taught about the 12th house. Like, they're not even things I necessarily was thinking that much about the 12th house. And I live with this. So, the intelligence of Danny being the one was made clear pretty instantly. And we went many places. It's kind of one of those conversations that the clock was what had to close it out, because we could have just kept talking and talking and talking, which Danny and I like to do. Danny is the one who invited me to New York for Unshaming Saturn. Many of you know that I was in New York City in November, and I was able to go to the New York Philosophical Society space to meet with the Big Apple Astrology Meetup group that Danny is the host of, and meet with all the wonderful people in New York and in the New York area who belong to that group and vigorously participate in it. It was super fun. And I'm very honored, and the whole experience, really forced me to lay down new language. And it's part of that experience. Part of that experience is what is now being becoming the essence of what is the class Unshaming Your Chart, which I am inaugurating this month. So this is a reminder that if you don't have it on your calendar, that the early bird tuition is Thursday, December 5th only, all day long. In truth, I'll probably just open it up on Wednesday night so I don't forget in the morning. That would be like such a me thing. Like, spend an entire week focusing on this one thing and then forgetting to do that one detail, like opening the sales page. Oh, goodness. Yep. So that's really for all y'all that are like, we don't need to hear anything else about it. We're in. We were in the moment. We were in before you even told us that this was coming. Like, okay. There you go. There's your discounted pricing. And then starting Friday, the 6th, through when we initiate December 18th, we will meet for 2 hours on the 18th. Attendance not required. If you can't make it, you will have a couple weeks then to take in the replay, because we're not going to meet over the holidays. It will be a time to think about other things and let what came through at the first meeting just move through you and be in the background, simmering in your field, alchemizing as it wants to. And then we will meet then 7 times in 2025 on Wednesdays, alternating times to accommodate folks in different time zones, being able to make some of the lives. And we're going to get into charts. We're going to get into charts now. So we're taking Unshaming the signs into, Unshaming the houses has been a bridge into charts, and now we're into Unshaming your chart. So it's a different approach. Because I like to do sometimes astrology chartlessly, which for me has a more mystical approach. It's like inviting in the paradox of being at all of the sky and the wildness of that and the freedom of that. And then on the other hand, holding charts, and charts are very real. Charts are amazing. Charts are fabulous. Charts are awesome, and they are very specific to every single human being differently. So teaching charts is like a different approach. It's a different approach that wants different methodologies, pedagogies, and tools. So I'm in the background preparing for all of this, bringing you in to this, what I feel is going to be quite an enormous stewardship in the years ahead. Yeah. Meanwhile, Mercury's retrograde. It's always a fun experience doing promo on Mercury retrograde. And Mars is stationing retrograde right now. So a few more days, but it's already here, really, energetically. Mars, my chart ruler, going to have 2 more Mars returns. It's not just a Mars retrograde for me. It's a Mars return because I've got a late Cancer Mars as an Aries rising. So it's my chart ruler. It's getting a Mars return with that retrograde. So many things will unfold, I am sure. And I'm going to roll with it. I'm behind the scenes also collaborating and listening to Mars to support me with staying flexible with the adaptations that come up with retrogrades. So sending love to all of us. We humans who, will experience 2 more Mars opposite Pluto in the process of all of that. So maximum spaciousness, maximum compassion, maximum generosity with one another, and excited for what's ahead. So let me introduce you to Danny. Danny Larkin is the Vice President of the International Association of Astral Magic. He previously served as Vice President and then President of the Association of Young Astrologers, 2017 to 2020. He is a lifetime member of the International Society of Astrological Research, as well as the National Council for Geocosmic Research. Danny is a pillar of the astrology community in New York City. He has studied modern astrology with Annabelle Gatt and John Marcasella. He serves as a fellow of the New York NCGR, that's the National Council of Geocosmic Research chapter, and teaches classes as part of its faculty. He organizes the largest monthly gathering of astrologers in New York, the Big Apple Astrology Meetup at the New York Philosophical Society, which he inherited from the late Kirk Kahn. Danny is certified at the first level by NCGR PAA. He is fully certified by ISAR, passing the ISAR competency exam after a series of workshops organized by Ann Ortley. Danny is currently working to complete a certificate in Hellenistic astrology from Demetra George, as well as the certificate in modern astrology from the Faculty of Astrological Studies. Wowza, Danny. Thank you for bringing, the fecundity that comes with all of that devotion, all of that love, all of that passion to learning and studying, being a student of the sky. Thank you so much for your time, your energy, your preparation, your spirit, your attention. And Moon to Moon community inviting you to enjoy this Unshaming the 12th House episode with astrologer Danny Larkin. Welcome to Moon, Danny Larkin. Thank you for being here.
Hey, happy to be here, Brittany. Great to see you.
Good to see you too. We just saw each other in New York City for Unshaming Saturn. It was great to meet you in person.
Yeah, New York loved you. It was so great to have you in person, and so many people came in person, and it was a really different way for us all to think about Saturn. It's a really special moment. It's just a really special moment.
Thank you. Yeah, it really was. It's very culminating here with Saturn on my sun. I'm having a lot of culminating moments is what it feels like. I was thinking about when I first connected to you. I feel like maybe it was back in the spring. Does that feel right that I reached out around
Yeah,
spring or
yeah,
summer? I got it like an email for a class or something on astral magic, I think. And then I followed links that led to you and your about page. And I just nerded out reading about you and your interests. And I was like, I want a reading with this human being. We've had three or I think actually four now because we did two on the ascendant. The
yeah,
ascendant alone needed
yeah.
two. There's a lot to say. And I've been living so much of the visual imagery that you gave me to latch onto, like being a philosopher with an axe, I believe you said, because the first decan of Aries is the axe, where I have my ascendant, and then I have that fixed star. I think it's Philosophia, you said.
Yeah, yeah.
And you
The
came up
asteroid
with
tennis. Yeah.
yes, you said like philosopher with an axe, and I was like, yes. Yeah, readings with you just bring a deluge of imagery that feels so rooted in history and detail, and I just really appreciate what your approach to astrology, and I
Oh,
love collaborating with you. Thanks for choosing the 12th house as your house to unshame.
yeah. I mean, it's been an honor to work with you, and um, Dimitri George taught me so much about how to become forensically specific about
Mm.
points in the chart. And I do work in a different way than a lot of other astrologers. Many of my colleagues, I love them. We all have a different style, and one session I can't do that, because every point brings out one thing.
Yes. I guess the first question I have for you, Danny, and I'm hoping this will lead us into our discussion on unshaming the 12th house, is of all the houses of the chart, when I asked you which one you would like, why did you choose the 12th?
Well, I feel that the 12th house is the most misunderstood house. Um, and I felt that it would be really a fascinating conversation. And I like a challenge. I like a challenge.
I love I do too.
I like a challenge.
I like to configure situations to make them more challenging. So, all right. Tell me then, I would love for you to bring the listeners into the 12th house. It's probably one of those houses that takes the longest time, I think, to really begin to land into, I think I understand this. And even then, it's so slippery. I don't presume, even as someone walking around with Sun, Mercury, Venus in my 12th, thinking about the 12th house all the time, I wouldn't presume to know everything about it because I don't think it's a place that you can know everything about.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, when you are talking with students and clients to invite them into this world of the 12th house, how do you like to start?
Well, I'd like to start in a gynecological way.
Mm, let's do it.
Yeah. Um, the first thing that we want to bear in mind about the ancient world, because astrology and the 12 houses of astrology, they hold a symbolism of a world very different than our own. In the ancient world, many women died in childbirth. I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying that's good, but I'm saying that's the way it is. And when I went to Greece in 2019 with Demetra, we went to the sanctuary of Artemis at Bouillon. I might be making that French in its pronunciation, but there's this famous Artemis shrine where all of the young Athenian girls were taken at about 12 years old, and they were taught the mysteries of childbirth. They were warned that many of them would die in childbirth. And there was a shrine for women who died in childbirth. But childbirth was, not only was it a life or death moment, but it was also extremely painful.
Mm-hmm.
Extremely painful. So it was painful for you, right? When you had your daughter, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
And I know we're not supposed to talk about that, but that's like the first
Okay,
layer of the
go
12th
for it.
house.
Yeah.
So the whole premise of astrology was that the whole premise of the 12th house is that the last 2 hours before the vagina releases the baby are considered to be the most intense in terms of the mother's pain. And so if a planet is rising in the sky 2 hours before a baby is born, then those planets are in the 12th house at the moment of birth. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is that if you have a planet in the 12th house, that planet was rising over the eastern horizon at the moment that your mother was at the height of her labor pains. And this is, something that we have recorded in Rhetorius, an ancient astrologer from about 6th century Egypt. But that is, in a way, the first principle of the 12th house, which is the mother is in maximum pain, the planet is rising in the sky, and then about an hour and a half or 2 hours later, when the baby is born, there is a new sign that is the ascendant, and then those planets that were rising when she was in terrible pain are now in the 12th.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's like there's a mark of pain or suffering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I mean, but to call labor pains just that, I mean,
Right.
you're a mother, and having a daughter, having a child is one of the most extraordinary adventures of life. And dare I say that the labor pains of the 12th house are a necessary evil, to maybe evil isn't the right word, but a necessary trial that is endured to bring the baby out.
Yeah, and it feels like it speaks to the kind of liminality that I think about with the 12th house. And like for the shame piece there, it's like in a culture that doesn't create a lot of story, myth, rites, songs, rituals to help us understand liminality and being between, like the ancient world did. I think when you feel yourself to be so liminal, there can be a lot of shame that you're trying to figure out how to be in one place or another place, but you're in neither.
Yeah. There
Mm-hmm.
can be so much shame in any kind of liminality. And, you know, something else I think about a lot is, several of my peers who happen to be women have told me, no one told me how painful childbirth was going to be. Why did no one tell me? I mean, we have a whole part of what's hard about talking about the 12th house is that we have a whole cultural bias about not talking about women's bodies, not talking about what the pains that women experience in childbirth. That is like a taboo topic. So it's just interesting, and and it's actually, wouldn't you agree that giving birth is quite a liminal experience?
Yes. And it's there's an aspect of like the monstrous to it.
Yeah.
I think is also part of the shame And part of the alchemy with unshaming, I think, can be embracing your even like the monstrous or like the hybrids or like
Oh
the
yeah.
strangeness of reality and your experience inside of it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I actually wanted my first child to be natural and did all the prep for it, but then because of the baby was positioned and I had to be induced, I had an epidural. So I didn't get the experience. And then my second child, she came so quickly that they told me it was too late for an epidural. So I got the reverse of what I
All
want
right.
both situations, but I did get to experience unmedicated childbirth for my second. And it's quite an experience. And it's so vulnerable.
Yeah. It's vulnerable. It's also frightening.
It's
I mean,
frightening.
it's frightening because and again, we're breaking some rules here because some of these things are not supposed to be named aloud, but um, you know, delivery is a contact sport. And there is still, even to this day, there's a risk of death. Um,
Mhm.
there's a risk of women still die in childbirth. We're also not supposed to talk about this, but there can be permanent damage that a woman's body sustains, even with all of the advanced medical, technology that we have today. Not that everyone has access to that, but it is a moment of extreme pain and total uncertainty.
Yeah, the terror.
Um,
And it feels like it's going to tell you something about the whole life of your being a parent. Um, so it can become loaded with fear that if it goes a certain way, that you're like doomed um, for the
I
rest of
wouldn't.
your parenthood.
Oh
Mhm.
dear. Oh dear. That needs to be unshamed.
Yeah, it does. This is for sure. I don't know if that then starts to take us to the fifth house. You might know the answer to that. But
One of the
yeah.
most powerful things that I do with my clients and with my students and with my friends is I ask people, my clients in particular, to reflect on what they know about the story of their birth.
Mm-hmm.
What is that story? What is it? What has your mother told you? And if your mother is still living, one of the first homework assignments I give people is to sit down with your mother and just ask her to share the story again. And then listen with astrological ears because the 12th house holds the story of the labor. And even if it's an empty 12th house, then we would look at the ruler of the empty 12th house. But if there's a planet in the 12th, that planet shows up in the birth story. Um, and
Mm.
then the moment of successful delivery, that shows up in the ascendant.
Yeah, wow. I love this phrasing, listen with astrological ears.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I do
Yeah.
think that well, I do know that my mom was in labor, was one of those ghastly over 24 hours situations, um, exhausted, defeated. Um, yeah, so there that is. But
And, and then what's intriguing about that story, and
mhm,
when you think astrologically, is that, I mean, you have several planets in the 12th house. And so this moment where those planets, it's very mystical. The they crossed the eastern horizon. They rose into the sky. Now, of course, it's a bit more complicated because when we have the sun out, planets that rise during the day, we can't see them rise because the sun is blotting it out. But they were still there. They rose, and that affected your mother's body.
mhm.
That affected your mother's body. That affected you. Um, and
Wow.
then And then you arrived.
Hey guys. So bringing my 12th house energy. So childbirth, that is a powerful way to bring people in because it begins to lift. It's like it lifts the box of things that we don't like to talk about. Right?
Yeah. And we, I think it's intriguing because, there's this great aspiration to somehow create a pain-free childbirth, which is
Yes.
right. That's not realistic, but that's an aspiration. It's an aspiration that's out there. Um, uh, which I think sort of speaks to the heart of, I just think it's just, I always like to open with a reflection on gynecology and labor and delivery because part of, I guess, why I wanted to the 12th house is that it is the house that our culture least prepares us for, I think. I just think we're least prepared for it.
Yeah.
Because we have a delusion. We have a delusion of grandeur that it's somehow if I just learn the right phrases or I learn the right things, I can have a pain-free life.
Yes.
And I believe that aspiration is actually a major generator of shame, and a major generator of quote unquote self-undoing.
Uh, yeah. How did we come into this aspiration of a pain-free life, like way of living here? My goodness.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I think about that when I learned that the root of vulnerable and vulnerability means the capacity to be wounded. And just thinking about like, yes, like why is being vulnerable something to be embarrassed about? Like we all are here to be wounded and we're all gonna die. We're all gonna experience pain. That is what we're doing here in a way.
One of my favorite esotericists, he's an Italian, Sofia di Vincenzo. I can't pronounce his name entirely, but he wrote a book on the Solarabusca, and he's written, and other people have talked about this in England, of the toxic nostalgia for the womb.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if I'm assuming you've maybe have looked at this a little bit in some of the evolutionary astrology stuff that you've studied, but uh, it's the idea that within each of us there is actually a toxic nostalgia we have for the womb, because there was this moment where we were suspended in our mother's uterus, and we had an umbilical cord that fed us, and we didn't have to do anything, Britain. We just had to grow. We just had to sit there and grow, and all of our basic needs were taken care of. We were totally enclosed in our mother's body. We didn't have to eat. We didn't have to do anything. Um, and yeah, I mean, and obviously we can problematize this a little bit with the idea of kicking, and some babies get very uncomfortable, especially when they've grown too big for the womb. But when we think about the embryonic state and the early fetus state, and there's a whole esoteric tradition of uh, arguing that within each of us, because we have this sort of memory and in a subconscious way of the womb state, that we think that somehow it might be possible to get back there.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I can't get over birth right now. I just can't. I'm just taking it to the uterus.
Taken it to the uterus. Yeah, I think all of this is like laying the ground for everything else we're going to talk about. So
Yeah.
I'm here for it. Okay, so after childbirth, where do you go from there? Where do you like to go with the 12th house?
Well, something unusual happened, which is that there is a name, an old name for the 12th house, and we we see it at the very beginning of the horoscopic tradition in Alexandria, in the milieu of Alexandria. And that is that the 12th house, although the labor pain connection was well known and well established, it was called the house of the bad daemon.
Mm-hmm.
And then the 11th house was called the house of the good daemon. And so this opens up a whole rich adventure about why did these scholars in Alexandria want to connect this observational layer of astrology. Okay, this is the house, these are the planets that were rising during labor pains. They wanted to connect that to the bad daemon.
Mm-hmm. What is the bad daemon?
Well, the daemon is a very hard thing to talk about. It's a very hard thing to talk about. And the first thing to say is that the daemon is not the soul, Britain.
Okay.
So what's interesting is from the perspective of ancient Hermeticism and ancient philosophy, you have both a soul, a body, and a daemon.
Okay.
Isn't that interesting? You got both a daemon and a soul.
And is the daemon both good and bad? Or are there different daemons?
It gets confusing. Part of what's hard is, we have a long philosophical tradition, and where we have many references to a daemon, which is basically a kind of unique guardian deity, but it is it's almost like your spiritual battery that is able to receive divine energy, and it guides your soul, it supports your soul, but your daemon is like the most divine part of you. We get a little bit confused here because we have astrologers love to hunt for indicators. So we have a lot of daemon, and then we have the house of good and bad daemon. A theory that's been put forward that I think is quite believable is that there might be some connection with Plato. And in one of Plato's texts called the Phaedrus, we learn about this idea that the human soul is a charioteer, but this charioteer with winged horses that goes through the sky has a good horse that is pulling the charioteer up and a bad horse that is pulling the charioteer down. And living a good life is about, and it's a bit violent, so I apologize, but I'm just trying to do due diligence to Plato, beating the bad horse into submission. And so each of us has a bad horse that is leading our soul astray. And we have to, well, we don't have to do anything, but we can choose to engage with that bad horse and prevent it from leading us astray and allow the good horse to lead us higher.
Mm. So fascinating. It feels like unshaming has to be somehow related to a different way of relating to that particular horse.
Yeah, well, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get to the Christians, but my view is the problem with contemporary culture is that we believe it might be possible to just get rid of the bad horse.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at Plato, you're stuck with the bad horse. You can't get rid of it. You can't just be like, all right, like I learned the right spiritual phrase or I've studied with the right guru and now I have been liberated from the bad horse. Doesn't work like that. Which I know it sounds paradoxical to accept the bad horse, but when so many people again are holding themselves, I think, to impossible standards.
Yeah. That in itself is shamey.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I wanted to talk a little bit about Heraclitus.
Please.
Um, you might know, and your listeners might know, the adage "character is destiny." Have you heard that one before?
Mm. Yeah,
Well,
not recently, but
not recently. Well, what's interesting is that phrase, the Greek actually contains the word daemon. Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So it's the Greek is actually ethos, anthropi, daemon. And what happened when the Brits first came to Heraclitus is they were like, oh, we don't want to deal with the daemon. That's too weird. So we're just going to make up. We're just, that's too weird. So they just sort of plucked in that word destiny. And that wasn't really the best way to translate that word.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So,
it's really something to do with the two horses together.
yes. And um, this word ethos, I mean, Dorian Greenbaum suggested the translation in her very famous book on the daemon on Hellenistic astrology. She said, habit for an individual is their most daemonic, and divine part.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Habit.
habit. Because that's what ethos is your habits. And what are your habits? Um, and I would go further if we really want to talk about what an ethos is, which is that they're moral habits that concretize your guiding beliefs and they underpin your character. And then these habits become your most divine part, that inner guardian spirit that ushers in your destiny. So you can sort of see why the Brits suggested character as destiny, but it's really this idea that we, through our habits that we form and that we maintain, we actually are able to touch our most divine part.
Yeah. And that feels connected to the way it feels true to me that unshaming is a practice. It's a habit,
Oh, yeah.
not a wishing away
Oh, yes. Well, yes.
or
But
repressing.
wishing away is so much easier, right? And it's so much easier just to wish things away.
Yeah. How cool. Oh my gosh, you're taking us to such rich places, Danny. Thank you.
um, but what happened with the daemon is that um, I want to talk a little bit of history now because the daemon becomes the demon.
Hmm.
It becomes the demon, and
Sure does.
um, it's actually quite a perversion and quite a distortion because, and part of the challenge here in this conversation is that we have a whole I mean, and obviously there are different schools of thought, but the theologies and philosophies that are most in circulation today, they do not touch the daemon. The
Mm.
daemon has been left out. And so it's a bizarre feature of astrology that the name of the 12th house contains this odd entity called the daemon that was intentionally discarded in Western civilization.
Hmm.
And that becomes actually quite intriguing.
Yeah. And it also helps create an understanding for why the 12th house can feel so strange to us, or like we are like unresourced in many ways.
Yeah. And under philosophized, under conceptualized, and
Yes.
it's under resourced. But you know, the other thing I'm going to say, I don't want to sound like too much of so much of this late capitalist culture that we live in today is about a promise of the return to the uterus. Buy this and you will not have a care in the world.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, and if you look at a lot of advertising, you look at a lot of marketing pitches, that toxic nostalgia for the womb is a very powerful sort of marketing strategy.
Yeah.
And, you know, so that is something that our current culture really incentivizes and rewards. And so, but what's really important to mention is that from the ancient perspective, you have something very divine and sacred within you. You, Britain. You have your own special divinity that no one else has. And it's different than the soul that you have. It's a special guardian spirit. And every one of your listeners on this podcast has that. And that has in some ways trickled down into sort of the spark of the divine that each person has. But in the ancient perspective, there was an awesome divinity within each person, an awesome divinity, and that was the daemon.
Awesome.
Yeah. And sorry, I keep bringing it back to childbirth, but from the ancient perspective, when infant mortality was so high and so many babies died in childbirth, so many women had miscarriages, if you lived, you were considered a miracle. You were statistically a miracle, and there was considered to be some kind of divinity within you that had facilitated and propelled a successful birth against all odds.
So helpful, this framing of childbirth that way, because I mean, I do think so there's a deep despair that we carry that from feeling cut off from our own miraculousness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I have a lot of theories about that. I think if you're cut off from your own miraculousness, then you're more vulnerable to sales pitches.
Well, yeah, shit.
So, you know, a profitable customer is an unhappy customer. So, and so there's a bit of a split in the tradition, because in many sources that we have, there's just simply a daemon. But then for some reason, the astrologers working in Alexandria, when they sort of codified earlier Egyptian and even Babylonian precedents and sort of really standardized astrology, and that's a whole complicated conversation because our paper trail is not as thick as we would like it to be. So we know there was a codification of astrology that happened in Alexandria. We don't know how much of that codification was an innovation and how much of it was earlier ideas that we don't have in other places. But what we do know is that these Alexandrian astrologers made this very momentous decision to side with Plato a little bit more in a way and declare the 12th house the house of the bad daemon. And that's quite momentous. And now we're, 2000 years later, we're still sort of reckoning with, well, why did they decide to declare the 12th house the house of the bad daemon and the 11th house the house of the good daemon? And what are they sort of trying to suggest about what the task might be? Yeah. That's
Yes. I'm like,
it's a mystery.
So then what happens? Yeah.
It's a mystery.
It is a mystery.
What I want to quickly talk about now is I want to contrast this idea of the daemon and and it's a little bit complicated, but if you really look at Plato, I think part of the idea of the Phaedrus is cut out, well, not cut out, but be honest about what your dark horse is and face it. And then your daemon, your good horse, your good daemon will allow you to rise.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's why your unshaming work, I think, is so powerful, because I mean, this is sort of psychology 101, but very often the patterns that we have that maybe we might most benefit from exploring are the things they're most ashamed of.
Mm-hmm.
And then that blocks conversation. It blocks, and there's an interesting, you've talked about this in some of your other podcasts. The 12th house is an aversion to the ascendant. The ascendant can't see the 12th house. And so we're very ashamed of what we can't see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I feel like part of my transmutation was I'll say this. I always felt like I was separate and different somehow than everybody else doing their thing around me. This wasn't that, it wasn't that hard going to school. It's interesting because the ruler of my 12th is in the third. Because I was, really love school, and loved learning, mostly learning wise, not socializing wise as much. But it was really after Saturn went through my 12th and my dad died that it became harder and harder to feel like I belonged to the rules of culture. So then I began to shame myself for how I can't seem to understand how to follow the rules of this world.
Mm, mm,
So my liberation began when I stopped trying to follow the codes of, like, this is what you're supposed to do, this is what adults do, this is what good citizens do, this is trying to just keep up with what it seemed like the rules everyone was following. And as I did that and unshamed my ways, as I unshamed my ways, so my kind of weird ways of doing things took over, and I began to just feel like a flowering. Um,
and it's beautiful that you felt that flowering.
with Neptune, starting with Neptune on my sun, yeah,
Beautiful.
through the
Neptune.
12th. Neptune through the 12th just kind of changed it all.
Um, Something I'm thinking about is you're talking about all of these shoulds and all of these messages that you got about how you should be.
Mm-hmm.
I want to take a step back and I want to talk about an aspect of astrology that is very daring, but is not often discussed. Each person has a fundamentally different birth chart.
Yeah.
Have you thought about that? No one has the same birth chart.
Yeah.
And so it really, so in the Judeo-Christian model, Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the Ten Commandments, and these were instructions for every person to follow. And then, at some point about 2000 years ago, there was a chap named Jesus Christ, and he said the greatest commandment, repeating the Shema of the Jewish people, was to love God with all of your might, with all of your heart, and with everything you've got, and then to love your neighbor, and that the greatest commandment was to love. Astrology has a completely different epistemological framework, and this isn't emphasized because it's almost radical, which is every person has their own law.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone has their own unique, and we see this from the very beginning of the astrological tradition, to discover the truth of your own chart and to cooperate with the divinity of your chart. And something else I forgot to mention is that your daemon was this, you had this incredible spirit, this guardian spirit, but the daemon was a bit unknowable. The daemon was mysterious. And, you know, and something that I was thinking about is that you went through a process where you've had to sort of unshame or let go of all of these messages you got about who you were supposed to be or who you should be, so that you could get out of your own way and become who you were meant to be, to become what your daemon wants you to be.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it's, I think part of the reason why the daemon material can be intimidating for people is like, people are like, well, I want to know what the daemon is. Give me a precise definition. You know, and we go through that same thing where, you know, when you meet with clients, well, who am I supposed to be? And it's like, well, I'm your astrologer. I can't tell you who you're supposed to be. Like, don't give me that power. Like, I don't even have that power. But what we can do, Britton, is we can, you know, it's sort of like what Rob Hand once told me. Rob Hand was like, well, you can never know. He said, it's hard to know who you're meant to be, but what you can do is take out the trash.
There you have it.
He was like, you can take out the trash and you can clear out the garbage from your life. And maybe that language is a bit shaming. You know, I would argue that what it actually means to take out the trash in an emotional and psychological way is very different than what our culture and some of the dominant ideas lead us to be.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. It's part of shame is feeling like you don't have the permission to set boundaries and say no and protect yourself. And so some of taking out the trash, when I hear, is giving yourself permission to not let certain things into your space, like codes of what good adulting is according to overculture.
You know, all I can say is life really begins at 40. Really, life really begins at 40. And I remember I got so deflated because I was 32 years old. And I got on a plane and I went to London, and then I took a very unpleasant train ride out to Cornwall. And I studied with the great Liz Green, you know, that great psychological astrologer. And she told us that, you know, Jung basically said everything before 40 is research. Everything before 40 is research. And we all make, I mean, and I was just past my Saturn return at that point, and I had this ongoing joke that no one has it all, their Saturn return. There's always something that you wish that you had that you didn't. You know, and that's sort of a universal. And, you know, where I'm going with this is that it takes time to sort out where our daemon is leading us versus the messages we got from our family, the messages we got from our friends, the messages we got from spouses and partners, the messages we got from mentors. And it takes time to actually to dump all that trash.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe we can be more gentle and say to compost it.
Mm-hmm.
To compost it.
Yeah. All right. So tell me, I'm feeling like if we, where's the next realm or the next room in this
The next
space that is the 12th house?
I want to talk about the Christian tradition, and I want to talk about some obscure material now, because the transition from the daemon to the demon is not really part of our history.
Okay.
I mean, it's in our history, but it's not history that is often told or spoken. And I want to begin the story with a man named Saint Anthony the Great of Egypt. Have you heard of him before? Maybe.
Maybe.
Maybe
Maybe through art history.
Yeah, maybe through art history. So he was an Egyptian abbot who changed everything. And I want to tell you a little bit about his story. And I had the incredible privilege when I went to Egypt last year that I actually went to the Coptic monastery of St. Anthony the Great. And I saw the cave that he famously lived in. And so Anthony the Great was a holy man, and he wanted to be holy. But his desire to be holy and good did not free him from what he termed the great battle with the demons. And so, although Anthony had taken a vow to be celibate, he experienced terrible bouts of lust. And although he had taken a vow to not drink alcohol, he felt cravings for alcohol in his younger years. He had taken a vow of poverty. He was left with cravings. And he embraced all of these cravings he had, all of these urges that he had. He accepted them. And he considered them to be demons that were tempting him. Mm-hmm. And so it's very dramatic, and we have a very bizarre life of St. Anthony, and he basically withdrew into a cave where he made battle with these demons. And this is the beginning of Western monasticism, is St. Anthony the Great and this little Coptic monastery. And I saw such incredible Coptic medieval art there. But and we're going to talk a bit about how this was changed in later years in a much more problematic way. But you could not be perfect. That was the great testament of St. Anthony the Great. You could not be perfect. And no matter how pure and good the intentions were of a monk, you would experience terrible episodes, painful episodes of temptation. And that there was no prayer that was going to free you from these confrontations. There was no book that you could read that would free you from these confrontations. There was actually nothing that could be done or said. And they believed, and this is the beginning of what are called the Desert Fathers, Anthony the Great believed that it was a direct confrontation with the dark side of your personality.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it. And this man lived 251 to 356, and I got to see the cave where he fought his demons, or he fought his urges. And then what happened? He died in 356, and then a little bit later, this other really important chap, whose name doesn't get mentioned very often, named Saint Evigenerus of Pontus, he got involved with these priests in the desert, and he wrote a treatise on what became known as the 8 evil thoughts. Basically, he came up with Bible verses that monks, like, there would be a Bible, if you were filled with a lustful thought, you would then say a Bible verse to cut off that lustful thought. And it's sort of an interesting, and some of this is the language, but they had this idea that, and it was sort of, and just so you're clear, all of these holy people were coming to the desert because they didn't want to be tempted in the city. They didn't want to be tempted in Alexandria. So they went out into the desert. And then they were quite dismayed because, these people wanted to be holy people and they wanted to live lives of poverty. But despite their desire to be free from the constraints of the material world, they would have moments where they would get greedy or they would get jealous of another monk's possession. They'd taken a vow to be chill and calm and loving all the time, and they would get angry at each other. It's so interesting when we read the document. It's a very bizarre 4th century document, because all of these holy people in the desert, they would experience painful cravings for the feasts of their youth. And so they would have a desire to eat a healthy diet in the desert, but they would have these cravings for the feasts of their youth. And part of why I'm talking about that, and why I think it's so important to talk about this material with Unshaming, is that the intention to be holy and good and true and honest, and the intention to have integrity, it does not mean that we will be immune from being tested.
Yeah. I mean, I do think self-confrontation is the essence also of unshaming. It's because it transmutes the old pattern into something
Absolutely.
passionate. I do
Well,
also think in there what I'm hearing is like not trusting your body and shaming your body's desires as problems. You know,
oh yeah. I mean,
that is like a real
there's
whole category.
that's a whole like weakness. And that becomes, of course, and some of that is Plato, and Augustine that came after Plato is the contempt of the body, which is a huge problem in the Western philosophical tradition. But I'm glad you mentioned that. What strikes me, though, and I think is really important, because I think many people want to be good people, Britain.
Hmm.
Most
Yeah.
people I've met want to be good people.
Yeah.
And it gets confusing because even if you have the best intentions, there are moments in which these terrible inner demons come up.
Hmm.
And then we think, oh my God, I've done something wrong. What did I do wrong? Why is and this is the thing I really wanted to say is that I have to constantly work with my clients and with my friends to say, no, no, like we all have inner demons. You're
Hmm.
not flawed because you have inner demons. That is actually what it means to be human.
Hmm. I think for me, what I found is that talking with them and showing compassion for like, yeah, it would be really great to have sex right now. Like, yeah, it would be super nice to have a glass of wine. You know, I agree. Like for me to talk to those parts of me rather than sh shame myself is just life changing. Just
But
validate what it is they want. Doesn't mean you're going to act on it.
except, but
But when they're not validated and they're just treated as problems, then you're not in any kind of relationship with them actually that's helpful.
yeah, absolutely. And there's so many directions that we can go in just from this point that you're raising. Um, and I'm gonna beat the horse dead a little bit, but for all of the people who are listening, you are human.
Hmm.
You are human. You are not a god. And all of us are going to have moments where we feel hijacked. And I think your unshaming work is so important because I think many of us have this unrealistic idea that if I just study enough astrology or I do enough yoga or I listen to enough podcasts or I sit through enough therapy that somehow in some way um, I will no longer ever be triggered.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I want to share something personal because you said like let's share personal things. So I now want to share something very personal and very raw and it's very, but I'm a violent crime survivor. It's very sad. It's actually someone tried to murder me when I was 26. So I took a terrible stab wound to my left leg, and it's a terrible, awful, violent story. And it's probably a hate crime, and I was attacked by someone on drugs, and you know, I took a 6-inch stab wound to my leg, and most people die from that, and I miraculously lived. But part of my story is that I've had to do a lot of work, body work on my bad leg or my golden leg. I'm told to call it my golden leg and not my bad leg, but when my left leg is damaged, it's hard to. So I've done a lot of work on my leg and I had to book an experimental therapist because I was having terrible flashbacks whenever I would do work on the leg. And my physical therapist, and this was right around my Saturn return, he was like, look, you have this leg injury. And the only way to improve your situation is to work the muscles in this leg. A lot of my left quadricep is damaged, and I needed to strengthen my hamstring and my calf and my glute and my core to compensate for the weakened quadricep. That's just what needed to be done. And and so I went to this like experimental therapy center and they did a brain scan, which was like odd. And I met with this therapist who he had worked with a lot of Vietnam War vets. And he was sort of creepy, Britton, because he would shake my wrist whenever we got together. He wouldn't shake my hand. He intentionally would shake my wrist.
Hmm.
And he was like, Danny, he's like, I'm shaking your wrist because I want you to begin every session willing to think in a different way than you think with anyone else. And what he told me that changed my life is he's like, I've worked with a lot of Vietnam War vets, and he said, the goal of therapy is not to never be triggered. He said, you're going to be triggered for the rest of your life over the assault and over other things. He said, the key is to learn how to bring yourself down when you get triggered. And that changed my life. And part of the reason why I love your unshaming work so much is, many of us get so ashamed when we get triggered.
Yes, it's the
We get
worst.
we get hijacked, and it's like, well, stop for a second, because actually you're shaming yourself, but that is getting triggered is a fundamental part of being human.
Yes.
We all have a bad daemon. We all have an unresolved, and we get into psychology, we all have quote unquote unresolved issues. And when our first instinct is to shame ourselves, we're actually, I think, going the wrong path.
Yeah.
When it's more about, I think you and Sabrina were talking a little bit about like existential kink, and it's more about, oh, like I'm triggered right now. Like, oh, like, how do I bring myself down?
Hmm.
What can I do? And that's a whole different process.
Completely. And thank you for sharing, Danny. Um,
Sorry, I know it's like super heavy. I know it's like super heavy. So you don't
no,
have to even like,
no, I'm here.
you
I'm
know,
here with this. Talk about pain, right? Talk about pain. Talk about like the the shudders of childbirth. Like going
um,
through something like that is not really imaginable until you're experiencing something like that. And um, yeah, I feel like what I've come to decide is that my triggers are love letters because they're showing me something about a part of me that wants to be seen, heard, validated, even if I'm not going to, you know, if I want to punch someone in the face. It's not like I'm validating doing that, but I would like to talk to the part of myself that's feeling really angry or something. It's
yeah,
really alchemizing to be able to learn these tools. And we have so much more education now than we ever did on healing trauma that we carry.
yeah. And you're right. We have so many tools. But I do want to say that I do think the Christian notion of sin is a major problem.
Yeah.
And I want to talk quickly about that. And this is the last bit of the Christian history. But Pope Gregory the Great, uh, who was 450 to 604, and we are now in a very obscure moment of medieval history. He took that list of Avigenaris of Pontus's 8 evil thoughts, and he reorganized it into the 7 deadly sins. But something fundamentally changed with Gregory the Great and with the way that the Catholic Church evolved, which is that whereas the emphasis in the earlier Egyptian monks, Britain was with a battle,
Mm-hmm.
suddenly this idea of an immaculate state that was achievable. So
Uh-huh.
suddenly sins were internalized. So whereas for Anthony and Evagenaris, they believed that these urges that we felt, these triggering temptations, they were actually something external to us. They actually believed that they were evil daemons, evil demons. Um, but Gregory the Great internalized it. And it was your failure to work with your own mind, your failure to work with your own self. That is what caused all of the sins. And it's a nuanced distinction, but to me, that is the beginning of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
because now so many of us, and we may not even identify as Christian, but we carry this idea that there is somehow, there must be a way that I can mastermind things so that I am never triggered, that I am never agitated, that I never do anything that it'll be possible for me to be in complete control at all times.
Yeah.
And Gregory the Great was the first who sort of set that really high bar. And I think that anyway, I'm sorry, I think I'm rattling on, but to me, that is such a distortion of the material and such a disservice that has been done.
Yes. And it's now we're fully away from the daemon.
Yes, absolutely. We are and part of this is because the daemon was cut out because you as a Christian, you do not have an autonomous divinity. The only divinity that exists is God the Father, who is, we, the Catholic Church, we know who that is. You do not.
Mm-hmm.
In the ancient world, each individual, well, I shouldn't say the ancient world so generally, but from the perspective of Greek philosophy and sort of the Mediterranean basis, each individual had been installed at birth with a mysterious numinous divinity that only belonged to them. And they had a task ahead of them to understand that divinity better. And the Catholic Church was not at all okay with that. No, 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 no.
Mm. Yeah. So then it becomes about disciplining your sinfulness to prepare for judgment.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an important man who doesn't get mentioned very often, and his name is Ivan Illich, and he was a 20th century philosopher and priest. And he believed that many problems in Western civilization or in our contemporary society today are perversions of the New Testament and perversions of medieval theology. And
Yeah.
I know that that's a sort of a retrograde read, but um, I think that the problem of sin is so endemic to our culture and such a shame generator.
Yeah. Shame
And
generator.
and and it's always a joke I have with my I do this terrible joke. It's a really sick joke. I shouldn't admit to this publicly, but I do this joke with my clients and with some of my astrology friends where I'm like, are you a Christian? And they'll be like, no. I'm like, well, you do realize that the way you're talking right now is very Christian sounding to me.
AKA shamey.
You're being very shamey, and you're talking like there would be a way for you to be totally pure and innocent.
Mm.
And yeah, it's just not. I feel like it's a major paradox in your work because the irony is that when we embrace our vulnerability and our imperfection and what it truly means to be human in the ancient sense, not the modern sense of human, not the Christian sense of human, but I'm talking about the ancient sense of being human, that is when pathways begin to open up.
Mm.
And I want to now, I'm sorry, this is the last historical thing I prepared, but I want to talk with you now about something very unusual, and that is Proclus.
Okay.
Proclus is a 5th century astrologer and magician and philosopher. And he was born in Constantinople in 1412. He went and studied in Alexandria. He did not, we don't think he got to meet Hypatia because we think Hypatia was murdered right before he got there. But he studied with the students of Hypatia, who was, of course, the great woman of our tradition, the brilliant woman who was terribly killed. And Proclus went on after some time in Alexandria. He went to Athens and started a great pagan school. And Proclus had this very interesting adaptation of Socrates and um, what he believed, and this is so interesting, is that if an individual had a piece of their psyche or a piece of their self that was unrefined, what they needed to do was more magical ritual.
Mm-hmm.
And then through that ritual, they would create a kind of sacred disorientation called explexus. And then they would discover a higher definition of beauty. And just hear me out on this, because this is part of our magical tradition, but it's not emphasized, and it's often a strange way. But Proclus and the Platonists had this view that if we had a behavior that was not serving ourselves, what was underneath that is that there was a beauty that we had not yet discovered.
Yeah.
There was some idea, there was some beauty that we had not yet discovered. And so um, and so they believe that if you did ritual and you did magic, it would create a kind of disorientation, and then your mind might be more receptive to a new insight.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, it's so intriguing. And for some reasons, Proclus has been sort of left out. I mean, some of us are talking about Proclus, but he has, um, I don't want to beat the horse dead on this, but the path or the route that many universities chart through philosophy always leaves out Proclus. And I don't know if you know this, Britton, but all of the magical Neoplatonists are left off the curriculum.
Uh-huh.
Mm.
Fascinating.
So, part of what I've always loved about your work is I feel like you've always wanted to create an plexus for people to do. And, when we start to feel like we're letting ourselves down, or we feel like we're getting hijacked, to retreat and withdraw, or maybe not that one, but to somehow lean towards the magical and lean towards gentleness, and then see what new idea might be emerging.
Yes. Can I
Yeah.
write that on my about page? Yes. Yeah. Magic is it,
Yeah.
I'd like to think of unshaming as a very magical act. Many
Yeah.
acts, many acts that make a practice, but it's a magical practice.
And it's a magical practice, but this idea that each of us is still discovering our own divinity. And each of us is still discovering certain pieces of our wisdom tradition. So I recently had a big breakthrough around anger that I want to share.
Please.
I'm Irish American, so I have huge ancestral demons around anger. And then I did some study of nonviolent communication, and I've had a couple of conversations recently where I have been so calm that it has felt out of character to me. And then I got everything I wanted.
Whoa. I guess you are more comfortable getting what you want.
It's just funny. I've been doing a lot of Mars magic and, working with Ginger and,
Yes.
studying the stars. And whenever Mars has some essential dignity, like carrying an amethyst around with me. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute. Like when you ask another adult for something in a calm way, they don't get defensive. And then I'm more likely to get through. And when I talk about how I'm feeling in a way that is non-accusatory and more just focused on my process, I'm more likely to get through.
Yeah.
And I like to think about this idea that we do magic and we do our rituals, and it makes us in a moment where then we might be more receptive. And I've been hearing about nonviolent communication for 10 years, but it was just like the most recent round of magic I was doing that when I heard that suggestion again, somehow it registered in a more deep way.
I love it. It's like that Caroline Casey wrote about building a temple to the god that's oppressing you, like from Odysseus.
Mm.
And
Oh my God, yeah.
so it's like, is the shame temple a Saturn temple? I'm just curious. And do you think that if shame is oppressing us, that we would build our temple to Saturn, or who would we build it to?
Yeah, I mean, we can build a temple to Saturn. I mean, absolutely. Let's do it. I mean, you know, that
But
one, yeah.
well, I was just going to say that that's the planet that rejoices in the 12th.
Yeah, part of the reason, historically about that, of course, is that, when it's a little graphic, but in the ancient world, many women giving birth had to be put under some form of restraint.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even in modern times, I mean, I know it's unpleasant to talk about, but you were restrained while you were in labor.
Mm-hmm.
There are some restraints um, and literally it's because the woman is in so much pain that if she is not restrained, she may actually not, her body may not allow the doctor to do what it needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
So the restraints were necessary to help the woman cope with her labor pains. Um, and there's this whole connection between Saturn and restraints. Um, yeah.
Saturn and restraints.
And you know, I also think about how um, when we are doing our 12th house work, we can have moments where we may want to act out. And then we make the choice that that's not what we want. And, Britton, you and I have talked about this so many times. And I feel like every time we talk, I just have to mention this. Um, you know, Before I went to Greece with Dimitra, I did a class at the Jungian Institute and I read something that changed my life, which is Jung didn't like should.
Mm.
Jung did not like should. And the reason why is because Jung rightly saw that we only do what we want. And Jung had this very dynamic idea of and this is not discussed a lot, but of the libido. But it's not the Freudian libido. It is the Jungian libido. And this is, what do you want? What are your desires? And Jung really believed that that is what we need. That is what we most benefit from working on. And so when we feel these moments where acting out intrigues us or acting out occurs to us as a possibility, Jung said, well, what do you really want right now? What do you really want to do? It's not about what you should do. Because as soon as you go into what you should do, you're shaming and you're activating your superego. And Jung believed that it was, and you in many ways have a lot of similarities with Jung, or this facet of Jung is that he said, you want to actually expand your libido. Well, what do you really want to do?
Yeah.
What do you really want? Do you want to spout off and be super angry, or do you want to learn about a nonviolent way to communicate? And ultimately, that's up to each of us to decide what we really want to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it kind of makes me wonder too if there's something about containing containing that magic within the ritual of whatever you're working with whatever the magic is, having a container around it in some way to get closer to the magic. It is in a way Saturnian in the sense that it creates a container of limits for that to roll through. And
Mm.
maybe through creating containers to work with the daemon, we allow some alchemy to come through that will then help us feel like we're building new habits.
I love that. Allow the alchemy to come through. I
Mm.
really love that. Um, Allow the alchemy to come through. Um, One of my favorite self-loving phrases that I say to myself when I feel tempted is I say, Danny, you've seen that movie before.
You've already done this, yeah.
I'm just like, I'm like, babe,
You've
you've
already
seen
paid for that ticket.
I'm like, you've seen that movie before. And what's been interesting is that um, I now love to learn. I love to go off the scripts from the past and like to learn.
Hmm.
And that's an adventure. It's actually, and I love, you do a lot of work with the erotic and how to make, like, how to say, oh, actually, like, I want the challenge of this healthy behavior right now. I want the challenge.
Hmm. And that's kind of Saturn kink, because it's just like,
Yeah.
oh, the deprivation.
Yeah. And that, um, like to push like a little bit further with food, just as an example,
Mm.
I'm gonna say something a little, many people do not eat well.
Hmm.
They don't eat well. And um I'm in this interesting place because I part of what's interesting about my story is that because of how severely injured my leg is, I have to eat. I've had to study a lot of nutrition and I have to implement a lot of nutritional science because I have to maintain more muscle than the average person to be okay.
Okay.
And that's, yeah, it's an interesting aspect of my story. And um, many people um, don't have that gift where they're forced to learn nutrition.
Yeah, and that feels like a sixth house, 12th house
Yeah. Yeah.
polarity there.
Welcome to my node. Welcome to my nodal story. Welcome.
Okay.
Welcome to my nodal story. So it's been interesting for me because I have friends who can sometimes struggle with these terrible food cravings. And then I'm like, but babe, what did you eat today so far?
Mm.
And so then the adventure becomes learning more about nutrition and learning more about like what healthy outlets are for that.
Hmm.
You know,
Which does, involve restraint then around what doesn't show itself to be supportive to you.
yeah, yeah.
And part of shame is like it cuts us off from the love that can be a big fuel for supporting restraint creating.
I love that. Yeah, yeah. Ah,
When I used to struggle more with restraining, quote unquote, restraining myself, I think a lot of it came from just like there wasn't a large cauldron of love, like boosting my relationship to those kinds of devotions and disciplines. And so because it felt like it was just about shame, that's just not inspirational. Like shame is not inspirational, you know?
I would go even further, and I would say should is not inspirational.
Should is not inspirational.
Um,
Yes.
I'm again, I know I'm beating the horse dead here, but should is not the solution to the 12th house.
Yeah. Hmm.
It's not the solution. Many of and we haven't talked about this. We haven't gone through the modern material yet, but
Are
and
you okay on time if we go
no,
through
I'm
the
fine.
material?
I'm fine.
Okay.
I want to jump ahead slightly because Tracy Marks is a very important woman in our tradition, and in 1989, Tracy Marks came out with a book that really looked at the 12th house and self-undoing.
Mm.
And I love Tracy. I really respect her work. And you pick up nearly any astrology book today, and she took a phrase that Anne Leo had mentioned and a phrase that William Lilly had mentioned, self-undoing, and she really expanded that. But um, I want I don't know if self-undoing is exactly the right word, Britain.
Yeah, I remember when I came to astrology and I saw that, that was frightening.
But I think what we can do is when we're faced with these self-undoing patterns, we want to decide who we want to be. And then embrace the journey can be difficult as we become who we want to be. It's called the locus of control in psychology. And it's such a subtle difference, but what I love about your work is the way that you're asking people to really have an erotic relationship with themselves and their lives, and to really enjoy who you are and enjoy who you're becoming.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Um,
think that when I was just going to say something that's been really helpful to me is like for example, if I'm like I'm not going to have I'm not going to have a beer tonight. I need a no beer night. I'm going to sleep really well because I like to have a beer at the end of the day. And then the end of the day comes and it's like, oh, and I could think about it as here I go with myself undoing again if I'm like, you know what, I really do want one. So I go through this process and saying to myself, like, just feel the desire and let the desire be so big and then validate your desire. Usually by the time I've like got everything out to have it, I don't even want it anymore because the self-undoing shame um is actually like propels me into the old pattern where validation, trusting that I love myself, validating desire, making that really big, it actually like turns me back into reminding me about the choices I make because I love myself so much. And it's very alchemical at shifting behavior.
mm, I love what you're talking about with that desire to have something to take the edge off at night, right?
Mm-hmm. Just like, yeah, that's a great desire.
You know, I
uh, because if I slip into, you said you weren't going to have one. Remember? Can you not make any promises? Keep promises. If I go into that self-undoing shit, it's I may end up having multiple beers because
yeah.
it's like a slippery thing that sends me into like a shame dance.
Mm, wow. There's
I
there's
know bringing it into alcohol space can be a little bit activating,
no, I love
but I
it.
also want to bring like a real example that
Yeah.
give us know.
My own relationship with alcohol was fundamentally altered when I went to Greece because I went to a temple of Dionysus,
Mm-hmm.
the ruins of a temple in northeastern Greece on the border with Thrace. And um, oh my God, and that temple was so powerful. We actually went to, I think, a pit where offerings were buried, and me and all of my like Demetra, all of the people I went on that, we all were like energy junkies. So we would like go to ancient sites and we would just like feel like the energy of the different sites, and like I just remember feeling this extraordinary heat in the offering pit at this temple.
Oh.
And I developed an incredible relationship with Dionysus. That's the Greek pronunciation. And then the Brits always have to mess things up. So the British tradition is to call him Dionysus. And he was the god of wine. One of his great epithet was the one who releases the bonds. Dionysus was also the god of theater, the god of catharsis. And I was very struck because Fucino, I learned about this from Austin at Norwalk last year. Fucino believed that at night the sun, the solar principle, went from Apollo to Dionysus. And then Fucino believed that there was something inherently Dionysian about the evening.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of ways to work with Dionysus at night. There's a lot of ways to work with Dionysus at night. And in full disclosure, I didn't get to have you over at my house, but next time you're in New York, I will. I collect Bacchus Dionysus themed glassware.
Oh my goodness.
And so I have, and I made the first big investment to do a big dinner party for some of my friends that I went to Greece with Dimitri in 2019. But I have vintage French crystal, and I have these beautiful Dionysus glasses. And they're vintage, they're real crystal. So you go like this. And, on occasion, I have wonderful dinner parties and I do wine pairings and I honor Dionysus. I really do. But because I have a sacred relationship with Dionysus, there are a lot of ways to honor him. I love the theater, Britain. I love the theater. I mean, I try to go see at least one show a month. And I have cultivated some friendships with people who love the theater. And, and it is actually a requirement when I'm dating a guy that he likes to go see theater with me. Because it takes the edge off when we go and we see actors on stage. And so part of what I love about your unshaming work is, it's totally valid to want the Dionysian at night.
Yeah.
That's totally valid. And that's actually healthy. And that's actually spiritual. And there are so many different ways to honor Dionysus at night. There are so many ways. I mean, there's these incredible adaptogenic herbs. I do have alcohol on occasion, but I don't have it every night because I can't because of my fitness routine. But yeah, there's so many ways to work with it. And I think that's part of unshaming the 12th house is, we can look at all of the quote unquote bad things that we want to do. And then part of the unshaming work is to see the divinity that is actually present in that urge and then to move it to like a higher level.
Yeah, I feel like that's coming in really strong here is like,
Can I tell you one more thing?
yes.
Most people do not have sacred liquor at their house. And I find this to be really odd. So I just find it odd. So I have this it's a great irony because I have the biggest home bar out of all of my friends and I drink the least. But it's just an irony that I don't fully understand. But one of my great pride and joys is I have Sotal on my shelf from Mexico, and it's indigenous tequila that has been triple distilled in rattlesnake skin.
Wow.
So sometimes if I have a close friend who's an astrologer or someone else who's on the path, sometimes what I'll do is I'll invite them over and then we will have this, and I bought it. I paid a good amount of money for it. So I honored the people who made it. And then we'll have just one little it's a little bit bigger than a thimble, but like about a 1 ounce pour of this Sotal that has been distilled in rattlesnake blood, a rattlesnake meat, and it doesn't poison you, but it triggers a major adrenaline response, and the body becomes alarmed, but it also creates a state of ekplexis, of sacred confusion and disorientation. And then we have a talk. We talk through it, and it's very magical. And that's great.
I love it. You were just talking about disorientation.
Yeah.
The vapor and new understanding.
But I'm always, pushing people. I'm saying, well, I mean, if you're going to honor Dionysus, then you've got to go all the way.
Yeah.
Having a beer and like watching Netflix, that's not very Dionysian. Sorry to say. Sorry to say.
Don't shame my night routine,
I'm
Danny.
not shaming it. I'm just saying, like, if you want to do something Dionysian, then like go
Yeah,
like all
like
the way.
go all the way.
Go all the way. And you know, so but I think that's sort of just learning under each of these quote unquote seven deadly sins, there's actually an incredible conversation to be had. An incredible conversation. And for some people the issue is anger, and it's having an incredible conversation about owning what you want and then figuring out the most effective way to ask for what you want to get what you want. And I've
Hmm.
and I've always felt so sorry for people with anger issues. And I've had my own share in the past, but what's so sad about the angry outburst is many of us have angry outbursts over completely legitimate and valid issues.
Yes.
But we are then punished by the people in our lives because they're like, well, no, like you had an angry outburst, and I'm not going to give you what you want because I'm going to punish you for that.
Hmm.
You know, so and that's the thing I think is that the engagement with the shadow, the engagement with our inner demons, it can be terrifying, but it also can be oh so gratifying.
1000. And it does get more easeful, it seems, with age. It mellows it.
Oh, absolutely. And one thing I'll mention is that Alan Leo, at the beginning of the modern astrology tradition, uh, Alan Leo believed that planets in the 12th house had occult talents, mystical powers. And I believe very much that planets in the 12th house do have a powerful mysticism to them.
Hmm.
And very often the yearning for a certain form of beauty when we're younger and we're first getting started on our journeys, we reach towards the more base expression of the planet. And then we have a moment where it unlocks, and suddenly we're like, oh, wow, like there's a whole different way that I can relate to this energy. And that's so much more exciting, so much more beautiful, so much more dynamic. And
That
I
feels
think,
so true.
and I think you've made that transition with some of your 12th house planets.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was Neptune that helped me get there. Um, 1000. Those are all my mystic planets. And I feel like it's so beautiful when you realize you can do something in the world with these previously seen as um like weird aspects to yourself. Um,
Absolutely. I mean, hmm.
we don't live in a culture where it's like your kindergarten teacher or like the fourth grade teachers like at the parent teacher conference, like, I think she's destined for mysticism. What do you think? Like
No.
nobody is gathering together as a community, like which ones are the mystic, like who are the mystics here?
Yeah.
Like you have to figure it all out yourself because there's not a community support system to help you make sense of some of these personality qualities, yearnings. Mm.
Yeah, there isn't, and that's, it's, it's tricky because each of us has our own interior of Britain, our own internal landscape, and it's almost impossible to fully explain it to other people,
Yeah.
and there is an alienation to that.
Yeah,
But there's also an incredible beauty to that, I think.
I do too. Yeah,
And
alienation can be a theme for the 12th house.
yeah, I mean, all right, I'm going to say something like a little bit like I've always noticed this paradox. I also have this other career as an art critic, and I've always noticed this paradox where people wanted to be regarded as avant-garde, but then they also wanted massive acknowledgement and acceptance.
Yeah.
And I
What?
didn't, and I was very confused. I was like, well, wait, are you avant-garde or are you not avant-garde? Because if you're avant-garde, you're not going to be acknowledged by a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And you might make it big at some point, but yeah, like, I mean, Vincent van Gogh didn't sell a painting his entire life, you know? I mean, so, and now look at him, you know? So, you know, I think what can be hard about the 12th house is that when planets are in the 12th house, we may endure a trial in solitude that no one else, and we can get support, but it is ultimately, you know, St. Anthony alone in the cave facing the inner demons,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and that is part of the story of a 12th house planet.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but what's important to say is that each of us has the resilience to face it head on,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and it's unfortunate that St. Anthony the Great has been lost in our tradition, I think. Um,
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of nice things to say about the medieval Catholic Church, Britain, I'm sorry to say. I just
Was
don't have.
there were there other aspects? I mean, we could talk for 12 hours on the 12th house, but were there
You,
parts of the 12th house that you were like, oh, we really have to definitely also speak to this?
I mean, one thing to mention, and this is something that Dane Rudyard introduced in the early 20th century, is the ancestral level.
Hmm.
And uh, Rudyard, obviously influenced by theosophical currents, sort of had these ideas that sometimes a 12th house planet, there can be like an ancestral connection.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, this approach is a little bit more emphasized in the UK, among astrologers I've met at the faculty than at different people I've met at astrology conferences. But to really look at your parents, your grandparents, your great grandparents, and what are um, ancestral, what is the ancestral story around this 12th house challenge?
Mm.
You know, and it's very interesting, you know, just, you know, we were talking at one point about some food issues, and you know, it is amazing how many individuals, you know, food issues can travel through families, and very often there is a history of starvation at some point in the family,
Mm-hmm.
you know. um and we carry our, you know, we might not be conscious of it, but we carry our ancestors. And so Rudyard felt that interrogating or exploring the ancestral material could really help to illuminate 12th house challenges.
Yeah, that feels really helpful. So would you say that if someone listening does not have placements in the 12th house, how how would they begin to explore that,
The ruler.
the ruler?
Yeah, the ruler of the empty 12th house. Because that ruler is still responsible for the 12th.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and they'll want to do their own rulership story to sort of understand how that plays out. Um, yeah.
Yeah. Anything else that feels important?
The only other thing I wanted to quickly mention was enemies.
Oh
So
yeah.
what happened in the what we call the Islamicate period, so the Middle Ages, but in sort of Baghdad and in Persia, uh, astrology was adapted to that time, and um, the 12th house became much more associated with enemies. They didn't like the bad daemons. They sort of went from the bad daemon to the enemy, the adversary.
Uh-huh.
And so the first triplicity lord was the enemy, and the second triplicity lord of the 12th house was one's labors. again, going back to the childbirth thing. And then the third triplicity lord signified beasts for riding, because it would be the beast that you rode when you went to battle against your enemy. So that's where some of those enemy significations come in. And you know, I don't know how helpful that language is about the inner enemy or the inner saboteur. That's a conversation to be had about thinking about the 12th house through that lens. But I thought it was one thing I wanted to share in my notes.
Yes. Well, I I had forgotten about that signification when I listened to like a 2024 year ahead forecast from the astrology podcast for Aries rising.
Mm-hmm.
And Chris was talking about Saturn moving through the 12th and, hidden enemies might be revealed. And I did have some individuals from my community reveal themselves to be like wanting to harass and cancel me publicly,
Oh, oh,
like rough stuff.
uh,
I don't know if you would call that 12th house type enemy, but it stuck with me because I remember hearing it in the forecast and was like, hidden enemies. I totally forgot about that signification. But I appreciate you linking it to the history of the daemon.
yeah. And there's a whole is the 12th house external enemies, or is it the enemy within?
And yeah,
And
yeah.
or is and it can be sometimes it can be either one.
Mhm.
And one thing I will say is that there's an old saying, which is it's a mountain climbing saying, the wind blows harder and at the top.
Mhm.
The wind
Yeah.
blows harder at the top, and if you do mountain climbing and you get up to the summit, the wind blows harder. And part of stepping into prominence um, in any community is there are people who will have toxic envy,
Mhm.
and they will act from that place. So
Mhm.
I don't know if enemy is exactly the right word, because but what I will tell you, Britton, is that um many people are scared to get big because of that.
Yeah.
And that's, um yeah, and that's unfortunately part of becoming part of living out your 10th house, is that there are going to be moments where where we will become the recipient of toxic envy and people who are motivated by toxic envy.
Yeah.
And I honestly, I try to just, I feel sadness for those people, because I don't know if I want to share this with you, but I remember, gay people for years were banned for years. I'm gay and I'm Irish and I grew up, spend a lot of time now in New York. I grew up in Oregon, but I now live in New York. And I remember, for many years, Irish gay people could not march in the St. Patrick's Day parade. And so we would do an alternate gay affirming St. Patrick's Day parade in Queens. And I'm gay and Irish, so to me, this was just a great source of pain that like the Irish American community had banned gay people from the parade. It was a real sore subject for me and for a lot of other gay Irish people. And I just remember I once went to this, we were marching in our Queen's alternate parade, and this woman was standing out there with like a hateful sign about gay people. And I didn't care what she thought. I wasn't offended. You know what I mean? I didn't have a anger response. I actually felt sympathy for her, because I was like, you are wasting your time right now. Like, you are wasting your time. Like, your stupid little sign is not going to turn me straight, girl. Like, your stupid little sign is not going to change me. Like, what are you doing? Like, you could be cleaning your house right now. You could be on the phone with your mom. You could be
Yeah.
like planning a date. Like, you could be.
It's so true.
I was like, I can't believe that you want to spend 4 hours here holding up a sign. Like, that
It,
is so weird to me.
It's like talk about self-undoing.
Yeah, talk about like self,
Like so disempowering
right. So I always like when
for
people,
her.
and so, when people start getting um preoccupied with trying to take someone else down, trying to torture someone else publicly, um, I think about her,
Yeah.
and you know, there's something to be said if you have a colleague and you feel uncomfortable with something they said or did, and then the two of you can have a conversation as colleagues and create a container
Yes.
for that and explore that. Um, that is something that many of us are willing to do. But these character assassination campaigns where people decide to make an enemy out of each other, I worry about those people because then they're not honoring their daemon,
There you have it.
you know? So, you know, yeah. So, enemies is something else and that can happen with the 12th house. And yeah, I don't know exactly what else to say about it other than the fact that um, there's a really amazing conversation in traditional astrology about how to prevail against your enemies by understanding your 12th house and its ruler.
Amazing.
And I have Venus in the 12th house, and no person can take away my joy from me.
Mm.
You know, and
Mm.
that's been a big source of strength for me when I've gone through different trials and tribulations. Because I've been running the biggest astrology gathering in New York. Been working on it since 2017, and there are moments where things come up. You know,
Yeah.
and that's okay. That's okay. I'm okay with that today because I understand that that's part of the process.
Yeah. And you have Taurus in the 12th?
I have I'm such a unique. My chart's very unusual because I'm a 29-degree Taurus ascendant.
Oh,
Yeah.
you're Taurus ascendant.
So I'm an anaretic degree ascendant, and about 2 or 3 days before I was born, there was a an eclipse, a partial solar eclipse over Russia at 27 degrees of Taurus. So my ascendant carries the eclipse. So my prenatal eclipse is right on my ascendant. And then I've got Mercury right there. My ascendant is empowered by the Pleiades. So, again, all of these details, but that enrich that ascendant. So,
Mm.
but I just want to commend you, Britain, because I think that when I hosted you in New York for this talk, you were just like a a cool glass of water in the middle of the desert, for so many people, and what you sort of shared about unshaming and being careful about our potential and not it was really powerful. It was just really powerful. And I really commend you for um challenging some of the orthodoxies of astrology and saying, we actually would benefit from talking about this in a little bit of a different way.
Thank you, Danny.
I think it's really, yeah, it's really important. It's really important. Because after your talk, I was like, oh, like, yeah, like it's interesting. Like we have these certain ways that we articulate certain things in astrology, but that's not even aligned with what a lot of us believe. But we just sort of repeat these certain truisms because we've been saying it for years.
Yeah.
So my biggest advice, and because we're wrapping up, but my biggest
Yeah.
advice to all of your listeners
Yes.
is if you have a 12th house planet, get magical with it. That's my biggest advice to you. And get curious about this alchemical journey of bringing it to a higher expression.
Mm.
And I really want to beat the horse dead with Proclus because it is through magic that we can become aware of what has been hidden.
Yeah.
And it is through magic that we can become conscious of what we have been unconscious of.
Thank you so much. And tell listeners about the kinds of classes you teach and ways they can connect to you.
Yeah, so this fall I worked with J.M. Hamadi, who has been doing a lot of work with Gensar at the Cali, and we did an incredible course on the 12 houses. Really, and Jay has been doing so much work with the Egyptian material, and we put our minds together to do the history of each house and its significations. And we're working now on a rulership class, which we'll be announcing pretty soon. I'm going to be doing a year ahead in New York on December 19th. So for those of you who are in New York or who would like to join virtually, I'm going to be doing a take on the astrology of 2025, which is crazy. It's wowza. It's really nuts what we're on the precipice of. And if you want to, the classes I teach are on the NCGR New York website, where I'm a faculty member. And
Thank you so much, Danny.
Yeah, this was great. This was a really cool conversation. So I hope you have a great holiday season, and I hope that you bring magic to your 12th house planets.
And there you have it, Moon to Moon. Unshaming the 12th house with Danny Larkin. Thank you so much, Danny. And unshaming the houses as a whole. I hope you have enjoyed this series. I've had several people asking me, are you so glad that you're done? Are you so relieved that you're done? And I don't know that I'm relieved. Because I just really enjoyed being in it. I really like series for Moon to Moon. This is just really informative, that this is really tapping at a styling that feels really at home for me and at home here on Moon to Moon. And I think you're going to be seeing a lot more series coming ahead. I encourage you to share these episodes with your own astrological communities. If you have friends, if you have groups, collectives who love astrology, please let them know that this series exists. The houses take years and years and years to root into. And we're never fully done. And I know how it is when you're learning, and it's just so wonderful when you find resources, just resources. So inviting you, listener, if you enjoy these episodes, to help Moon to Moon, help me to get the information about the availability of this series out into other communities beyond my own, so that folks can find it and they can find the astrologers who came and supported it. If you're interested in going deeper, if you want to get your chart out with me, inviting you to come into Unshaming Your Chart. Early bird, once again, is this Friday. No, not Friday. It's this Thursday, December 5th only, just the one day. I'm going to have it open kind of maximum spaciousness for all time zones. So it will be longer than 24 hours because it's from where? That's super relative. So it'll be a lot more than 24 hours, but the idea is that this Thursday is the day. And then starting Friday, it will be Friday morning probably for me in Central Time Zone, United States. It will go back. It will then just be regular enrollment all the way until we begin on the 18th of December. And then I will be in the gate. We will all be in there together, creating creating what that space is. It's the inaugural group, and I always learn so much where I'm bringing that creativity energy to the inaugural space and like learning about what it is in real time with those who come to it. So I hope if it's calling you and it feels like a yes, that you'll join me. Know that if you want someone to give this to you as a Christmas gift or whatever, holiday gift, when you choose a pay in full option, I don't know why it's not in all options, but in Teachable, it's the pay in full option. You can have a gift option available, so someone could buy it for you and then put your name and email in, and then you'll just be enrolled. Likewise, if you want to give this to someone, then you can also choose the gift option for them and just put their information in, and then they'll be in the class and not you, the buyer. And if there's anything else from my shop that you would like to give someone for the holidays, encouraging you to do it, supporting a single mom working over here. And I really appreciate that. I really appreciate you thinking about my offerings when you're gifting. So I've got really beautiful books, really beautiful workbooks. My Living the Sign series, Moon to Moon, is a workbook. And those are self-published. And then my book, Living Astrology, was published this year by Gibbs Smith. So I sell those, like I buy them wholesale and I sell them in my shop. It's different than being a self-publisher. I'm not able to match Amazon's price, of course, but I am able to sign books. So if you would like the added boost of having me write a note to someone and give it to them as a gift, or ask someone to write you a note as a gift for you this holiday, I would love to do that. You just have to put it in the box at checkout that says notes, and I'll look there and I'll know what to do. So that's really sweet. I probably have like 22 left now. And so that's probably enough for everyone who wants one, but maybe not. So that would be the other thing is if you want free shipping at my shop, you just put in free ship. It's free shipping for domestic at Etsy already. It's not for international. Sorry, I can't help you there. But the free ship option is only for media mail. So that's something to keep in mind. Is if you want to do the free ship option, you need to do it early enough that you give me a few days to actually ship it, and then it's got a whole week to get wherever it's going. Because media mail can be kind of slow, but you can always pick a priority shipping if you want something more quickly. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for doing this series with me. Wowza. Thank you to all the astrologers, the astrological community, the students who have come into this space because of the series. It means so much to me. I'm really proud to be contributing to the field and the discourse around our understanding of both unshaming and astrology, as well as how to understand the houses and astrology. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.